Aileen Wuornos. You've probably heard the name. It brings up this really chilling image, right? America's first female serial killer, a highway prostitute who killed her clients. But if you look just behind the headlines, there's a story that is so incredibly full of trauma, so complex, that it really makes you ask some tough questions. So let's try to figure out what was really going on.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. Was Aileen Wuornos just a cold-blooded monster, born to kill? Or was she a deeply, deeply damaged victim of horrific abuse who was just lashing out in this violent, twisted way to survive? That's the question we're going to keep in mind as we look at her life and her crimes.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with that media image of her, and then get into the killings themselves. After that, we're going to rewind and look at her absolutely brutal childhood, see what that did to her mind, and then cover the shocking exploitation that happened around her case, and we'll wrap it all up by looking at how her story got told on the big screen. You know, the media loves a good nickname, and the one they gave Wuornos was the Damsel of Death. And honestly, it's a title that's both kind of captivating and absolutely terrifying. It just perfectly sums up all the contradictions that make her case so fascinating and so disturbing.
So on the surface, the facts are just brutally simple. In the span of about a year, Aileen Wuornos, a transient sex worker, shot and killed 7 men along the highways of Central Florida. That shocking spree pretty much sealed her spot in true crime history forever. But here's the thing. As soon as investigators started digging into the actual crimes, it was super clear that Wuornos just didn't fit the mold. She wasn't like any serial killer they'd seen before, and that made her way harder to understand, and honestly, probably even more frightening.
7 men. In just a little over a year. I mean, the sheer scale of the violence was staggering, and it set off this huge investigation across multiple states to hunt down the killer who was stalking Florida's highways. You know, right from the very beginning, Aileen's motive was the most controversial part of this whole thing. She never wavered. She claimed every single killing was in self-defense, that these men had either attacked her or were about to. She even argued that robbing them was just an afterthought, like a final act of revenge.
And this is what made her so unusual. She just shattered all the stereotypes. Think about it. Female serial killers, they usually use quiet methods, like poison, and they go after people they know. Male killers, on the other hand, often hunt strangers for that feeling of power. Aileen? She was a weird mix of both. She used a gun, and she targeted strangers, just like a male killer, but claimed her motive was all about survival and revenge, which is something you see more with female offenders. She was a total outlier.
So, to even begin to understand the killer, we have to look at the person. And to do that, we need to go all the way back to the beginning, to a childhood that was so full of trauma and neglect that it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's just a relentless series of traumatic events. Her mom abandons her when she's just a baby. By 11, she's already trading sex for things like beer and cigarettes. At 13, she's raped. At 14, she gives birth to a baby from that rape, and that baby is immediately taken away. And then at 15, she's kicked out of her house and is literally left to survive on the streets by herself.
One legal expert who really dug into her case summed it up with a sentence that just hits you right in the gut. He said, "Against the destructive forces in her life, she truly never stood a chance."
And if you can believe it, the details are even worse. The father she never even met was a convicted child molester who hung himself in prison. She ended up with her alcoholic grandparents. Her grandfather was this incredibly violent, cruel man who beat her with a belt and, according to Aileen, sexually abused her too. Get this, a school report from 1970 literally warned that it was vital for her to get counseling. She never got it, not once.
So with all that horror happening on the outside, you can only imagine the storm it created on the inside. To really get a handle on her actions, we've got to look at what experts think was going on in her head. This wasn't some simple case of evil. It was pretty much a textbook example of severe mental illness that was forged in trauma.
Okay, this is really important to understand. We throw the word psychopath around a lot, but Wuornos didn't really fit that classic, cold, calculating profile, like a Ted Bundy. Her crimes were messy, impulsive, and super emotionally charged. And while some killers make up abuse stories, Aileen's trauma, it was all there, in black and white, extensively documented.
A lot of experts are pretty sure she had borderline personality disorder, or BPD, and it makes so much sense. It explains her totally chaotic relationships. That desperate need for love, the wild mood swings, and those violent, impulsive explosions. BPD is really rooted in this deep, intense fear of being abandoned, a fear that pretty much defined her entire childhood. And then, on top of that, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, years and years of constant abuse and just trying to survive on the streets left her in this state of what they call hypervigilance. Like she was always on high alert, always waiting for the next attack. That constant state of fear probably fueled her belief that her clients were about to hurt her and that she had to kill them before they killed her.
But the story, it actually gets even more disturbing. Because as soon as she was caught, Aileen Wuornos, the human being, she just disappeared. She became a product, a spectacle to be bought and sold by the very people who were supposed to be looking out for her.
I mean, the title of Nick Broomfield's incredible 1992 documentary says it all. He went down to Florida to cover the trial, and what he found was that the real story wasn't just the murders. It was this total feeding frenzy of exploitation happening all around her. The sad truth is, she was completely on her own. Her own lawyer was caught on camera trying to line up movie deals instead of, building a legal defense. Her adoptive mother seemed way more interested in the spotlight than in her daughter's life. And maybe the most shocking part, mainstream feminist groups who you'd think might see her as the ultimate victim of male violence were almost completely silent.
And this might just be the most unbelievable detail of her entire trial. Her very first victim, a man named Richard Mallory, had actually served time for attempted sexual assault. That fact would have been absolutely critical for her self-defense claim, but it was never even brought up to the jury. It was just a catastrophic failure of her legal team. Wuornos was executed in 2002, but her story didn't die with her. Not at all. It was immortalized in pop culture, and most powerfully in a film that would force the entire world to see her in a totally new and really unsettling way.
So in 2003, the movie Monster comes out, and Charlize Theron's transformation into Aileen Wuornos was just so absolute, so profound, that the legendary critic Roger Ebert literally called it one of the greatest performances in the history of movies.
Theron ended up winning an Oscar for it, but the film did something even more important. It made a huge, mainstream audience look past that damsel of death headline and really see the wounded, raging, complicated human being underneath. The movie didn't make excuses for her crimes, not at all, but it demanded empathy. It showed her not just as a monster, but as a person who was created by truly monstrous circumstances.
So in the end, we're just left with this brutal paradox. Aileen Wuornos was, without a doubt, a perpetrator of horrific violence, but she was also, just as undeniably, a victim of it first. Her story is this stark, terrifying example of the cycle of violence, where trauma just creates more trauma. And it leaves us with this really uncomfortable question that has no easy answer. If a victim creates another victim, who is the real monster?